The house is sold, sign the divorce papers and get out. I can still see the look on Greg's face. He was standing on the front porch of our Malibu home, holding a manila envelope. Beside him stood a woman I recognized immediately from the photos I'd found months earlier, but never confronted him about. Vanessa, 30-something, blonde, perfect teeth, designer sunglasses sitting on top of her head. She was leaning against Greg's arm like she belonged there. For a second, I honestly wondered if I was having some kind of stroke. 3 hours earlier, I had been sitting in an attorney's office in Thousand Oaks, listening to my grandfather's will being read. Now my husband of 27 years was kicking me out of my own house. Life can turn faster than anyone tells you. My name is Diane Parker. I was 58 years old at the time. For most of my adult life, I worked as a school counselor in Ventura County. Nothing glamorous. Just helping kids navigate family problems, college applications, heartbreak, and everything in between. The funny thing is, after decades of helping other people recognize warning signs, I missed some pretty obvious ones in my own marriage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I drove my silver Toyota Camry from Malibu to Thousand Oaks just after 9. The weather was beautiful. The Pacific Coast Highway was clear. The ocean looked calm. I remember thinking how much my grandfather Walter would have loved that drive. He'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 14. He wasn't a wealthy man back then, at least not that anyone knew. He owned a small construction company in Southern California and lived modestly. No fancy cars, no country clubs, no bragging, just hard work. Over the years, the company grew. Real estate investments followed, then commercial properties. By the time he passed away at 87, he had accumulated far more wealth than most people realized. The reading took place at the office of Robert Klein, his longtime attorney. There were only 4 people in the room: Robert, his assistant, me, and a representative from the family trust. I remember clutching a cup of terrible coffee while trying not to cry. Losing Grandpa Walter felt like losing the last person who truly knew me. Robert slid his glasses down his nose and began reading. Most of the will involved charitable donations, scholarships, veterans organizations, local community programs. Exactly the kind of things Walter cared about. Then Robert looked up at me. "Diane, your grandfather left specific instructions regarding you." My stomach tightened. I expected a few $100,000. Maybe the family photographs, the grandfather clock from his living room. Instead, Robert calmly announced that I would receive $8 million. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. Then came the second surprise, the Malibu beachfront property. The house I'd grown up visiting every summer. The same property that had been in our family for decades. I felt tears filling my eyes. Robert handed me a tissue. "Your grandfather loved you very much." That sentence broke me. Not the money, not the property, that sentence. Because I knew it was true. After the meeting ended, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes. I called my best friend Linda. She screamed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Then I called Greg. No answer. I wasn't surprised. He'd become increasingly distant over the previous year. Late meetings, business trips, constant texting. He always had explanations. And honestly, I didn't have the energy to investigate. After 27 years of marriage, trust becomes a habit, sometimes a dangerous one. I decided I'd tell him in person. Maybe this inheritance would give us a fresh start. Maybe we'd travel. Maybe we'd finally retire. Maybe we'd become the people we used to be. I stopped at a bakery in Westlake Village and bought his favorite lemon cake. Looking back, that part almost makes me laugh. I was carrying a celebration cake to my own execution. I arrived home around 3:15. The first thing I noticed was an unfamiliar Mercedes parked in the driveway. The second thing was Greg standing outside. The third thing was Vanessa. Everything after that happened quickly. "Diane," Greg said. His voice sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced. "We need to talk." Vanessa smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind people wear when they think they've already won. I set the cake down on the porch table. Nobody offered to help. Nobody asked where I'd been. Nobody cared. Greg handed me the envelope. Inside were divorce papers. I stared at them, then at him, then back at the papers. 27 years reduced to a stack of legal documents. Vanessa crossed her arms. Greg cleared his throat. "The house is sold." I blinked. "What?" "The Malibu property." I thought he meant the house Grandpa had left me. Then I realized he meant the house behind us. Our house. The one we'd lived in for nearly 20 years. "The buyer closes next week," he said. You sold our house. Our house, Vanessa muttered. Greg ignored her. Diane just signed the papers. I felt strangely calm, almost detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. You sold the house without telling me. The timing worked out. The timing. He sighed dramatically. As of today, we're done. Vanessa stepped closer to him. The gesture told me everything. No denial. No shame. No attempt to hide the affair anymore. Greg pointed toward the papers. Sign them and move on. I looked at both of them. Then something strange happened. Instead of panic, I felt clarity. The kind that comes after months of confusion. Years, maybe. Every late-night text. Every canceled anniversary dinner. Every unexplained absence. The pieces finally fit. I opened my purse and pulled out the folder Robert had given me. I hadn't even reviewed everything inside. Most of it was legal paperwork. Property documents. Trust records. A sealed envelope from Grandpa marked, "For Diane only." I ran my finger across the envelope. Then I looked at Greg. He seemed so confident. So certain. As if the story was already over. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. A smile slipped across my face, Vanessa noticed. Greg frowned. What are you smiling about? I folded the divorce papers. Carefully. Neatly. Then I looked directly at him. That's funny. Neither of them spoke. I tapped the folder against my palm. Because the house you just sold? I paused. Belongs to someone else. Greg laughed. Vanessa laughed too. Neither of them had any idea what was waiting inside Grandpa's sealed envelope. And honestly, neither did I. I spent that night at a Hampton Inn in Thousand Oaks. Not because I couldn't afford anything nicer. Because I couldn't think. After 27 years of marriage, my brain seemed incapable of processing what had happened in a single afternoon. By 7 o'clock that morning, I'd been a wife planning a celebration. By 4 o'clock, I'd been served divorce papers. By sunset, I was sitting alone in a hotel room eating microwave macaroni from a plastic container. Life has a strange sense of humor. The room smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner. A baseball game played quietly on the television. I wasn't really watching. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at Grandpa Walter's sealed envelope. For Diane only. The words seemed heavier now. I must have looked at that envelope 100 times throughout the evening. Part of me didn't want to open it. It felt like hearing his voice one last time. Once I read it, there would be no more messages from him. No more surprises. Just memories. Around 10:30, I finally broke the seal. Inside were several pages. The first page was handwritten. His handwriting. The same neat block letters he'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards. I instantly started crying. Not because of the money. Not because of Greg. Because for a moment it felt like Grandpa was sitting across from me. The letter began simply. Diane, if you're reading this, something has probably gone wrong. I laughed through my tears. That sounded exactly like him. Practical. Direct. No unnecessary drama. The letter continued. He explained that over the years he'd learned an important lesson about wealth. Money attracts character. Good character and bad character. Sometimes you don't know which is which until money appears. Then came the sentence that made me stop breathing. The Malibu property was never transferred directly to you. I reread it twice. Then a third time. What? I grabbed the next document. Then another. Then another. For nearly an hour I sat cross-legged on the hotel bed reading legal paperwork. The truth slowly emerged. The property wasn't mine. At least not in the way Greg believed. It belonged to the Parker Family Coastal Trust. A trust my grandfather had established almost 15 years earlier. The trust owned the property. Not me. Not Greg. Not anyone else. I was designated as managing trustee. That gave me authority to oversee the property. But I couldn't sell it. Neither could anyone else. The trust documents contained strict protections. Any sale required approval from 3 trustees. 3. Not 1. 3. I flipped through the pages again. My name was there. Robert Klein's name was there. And the third trustee was a retired judge named Margaret Ellis. I had met her several times growing up. Suddenly my stomach tightened. Greg had sold something he didn't legally control. Something nobody could legally sell without multiple approvals. I immediately reached for my phone. Then stopped. It was nearly midnight. Instead, I barely slept. The next morning, I called Robert Klein at exactly 8 o'clock. He answered on the second ring. I was expecting your call. Robert, I read everything. Silence. Then a long sigh. I figured you had. Greg sold the house. I know. That got my attention. You know, Diane, the buyer's attorneys, contacted me yesterday afternoon. I sat down. What does that mean? It means your husband has created a very expensive problem. An hour later, I was sitting in Robert's office again. This time there was no coffee, no small talk, no condolences, just paperwork spread across a conference table. Robert looked more tired than I'd ever seen him. He slid several documents toward me. The property cannot legally be sold. I nodded. I understand that. The buyer already paid several $1,000,000 in deposits. My heart sank. To Greg, Robert nodded. Unfortunately, I rubbed my forehead. This was becoming much bigger than a divorce. The buyer wasn't some random individual. It was a luxury real estate investment group based in Newport Beach. They had lawyers, lots of lawyers, and they were furious. Robert pointed at another document. They believed Greg had authority, but he didn't. Correct. Then why am I worried? Robert gave me a look. Because life is never that simple. Because when millions of dollars are involved, everyone gets sued first and asks questions later. I leaned back in my chair. Wonderful. My husband had cheated on me, thrown me out, attempted to sell property he didn't own. And somehow I was still getting dragged into the mess. The next few days were exhausting. Phone calls, meetings, legal reviews, trust documentation, financial records. Every morning started with another surprise. Every evening ended with another headache. Meanwhile, Greg acted like nothing was wrong. Friends began calling me. Apparently, he and Vanessa had already started celebrating. Photos appeared online. Dinner at Nobu Malibu. Champagne. Luxury shopping trips. Vanessa posing beside expensive cars. One picture showed Greg standing in front of the beachfront property with his arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "New beginnings." I almost admired the confidence. Almost. The funniest part, half the furniture in those photos still legally belonged to the trust. I showed one picture to Robert. He stared at it for several seconds, then he started laughing. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. What? He pointed at Greg's watch. He bought that 3 days ago. So, Robert shook his head. He bought it with money from an invalid property sale. Even I had to smile. The man was building a disaster one purchase at a time. But despite those small moments, I was struggling. More than I expected. At night, I lay awake wondering how long Greg had been lying. Months. Years. When exactly had he stopped being my husband? I kept replaying ordinary moments, holiday dinners, road trips, quiet evenings watching television. Had any of it been real? That question hurt more than the divorce. Money problems can be solved. Legal problems can be solved. But discovering that your memories might be built on lies, that's harder. One afternoon, I found myself sitting alone at a Starbucks in Westlake Village. I wasn't reviewing legal documents. I wasn't talking to attorneys. I was simply staring out the window. For the first time, I considered walking away, keeping the inheritance, taking a smaller settlement, starting over somewhere else. Maybe Arizona, maybe Oregon, maybe anywhere that didn't remind me of Greg. The fight suddenly felt exhausting. Maybe justice wasn't worth it. Maybe peace mattered more. That evening, Robert called. His voice sounded different, sharp, focused. "Diane, are you sitting down?" Immediately, my pulse quickened. "Yes." "We found something." I gripped the phone tighter. "What?" "The sale paperwork." I waited. "There are electronic signatures on multiple documents." So, silence. Then Robert spoke very carefully. "Those signatures appear to be yours." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "We've already compared them." My heart started pounding. "They aren't mine." "I know." Another pause. "Diane," I heard papers moving. "We believe Greg forged your signature." I closed my eyes. For a moment I couldn't speak. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This wasn't even just divorce. Greg hadn't simply cheated. He hadn't simply stolen. He may have committed fraud. Serious fraud. The kind that attracts investigators. The kind that destroys careers. The kind that can change everything. And for the first time since that awful afternoon on the porch, I realized something. Greg wasn't standing on solid ground. He was standing on a trap door. He just hadn't stepped on it yet. The first thing I learned about fraud investigations is that they're much slower than television makes them look. Nobody burst through doors. Nobody slapped handcuffs on anyone. Nobody delivered dramatic speeches. Mostly people requested documents. Lots and lots of documents. Meanwhile, life kept moving. Bills still arrived. Groceries still needed to be bought. The dog still needed to be walked. Well, not my dog anymore. Greg had kept our golden retriever Baxter. That part hurt more than I expected. Funny what stays with you. 3 weeks after I moved into the Hampton Inn, I rented a small furnished condo in Camarillo. Nothing fancy. One bedroom. A little balcony overlooking a parking lot. A coffee shop within walking distance. For the first time in nearly 30 years, I was living alone. The silence felt strange. At first, I hated it. Then I started noticing things. I could leave a book on the kitchen table and find it there the next morning. I could watch whatever I wanted on television. I could eat dinner at 4:30 if I felt like it. Little freedoms. Tiny things, but they mattered. The legal situation, however, was becoming increasingly complicated. Every few days, Robert called with updates. Most weren't encouraging. The investment company wanted answers. The trust wanted answers. Attorneys wanted answers. Everyone wanted answers. The only person who seemed completely relaxed was Greg. That changed quickly. One Friday morning, Linda called me laughing so hard she could barely speak. "You need to see this." "See what?" She texted me a screenshot. It was a Facebook post from Vanessa. The photo showed her standing on the deck of the Malibu property wearing a white dress and oversized sunglasses. The caption read, "Living the dream. Sometimes life rewards the brave." I stared at it. Then I noticed something. The comments. Dozens of them. Friends congratulating her. People assuming she and Greg owned the property. Then came my favorite comment. An elderly woman named Ruth had written, "Congratulations, which trust owns the property now?" Vanessa had replied, "What trust?" I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. For the first time in weeks, something felt genuinely funny. Apparently, Vanessa had absolutely no idea what kind of situation she had attached herself to. The following Monday, Robert called. "Good news." That was unusual. I sat up straighter. "I'll take any good news available." We obtained additional financial records. And Greg has more debt than we thought. That got my attention. Apparently, while I was worrying about retirement plans and rising grocery prices, Greg had been quietly accumulating financial disasters. Credit card balances, personal loans, business debts, a failed investment in a restaurant, several gambling losses from casinos in Las Vegas. The numbers were staggering. I felt physically ill. Not because of the money, because I had lived beside this man for decades without knowing. Robert continued. The sale proceeds appear to have been his solution. I understood immediately. Greg wasn't just chasing Vanessa. He wasn't simply leaving his marriage. He was trying to escape financial ruin. The property sale wasn't a bonus. It was his lifeboat. Only the lifeboat belonged to somebody else. A few days later, another surprise arrived. An investigator hired by the investment company requested an interview. At first, I resisted. I was tired, emotionally exhausted. The last thing I wanted was another conversation about Greg. But Robert insisted. So I met the investigator at a restaurant in Westlake Village. His name was Frank Morales, former law enforcement. Calm voice, sharp eyes, the kind of person who noticed everything. For nearly 2 hours he asked questions. Nothing dramatic, just details, dates, emails, conversations, patterns. At one point he looked up from his notes. "When did your husband start using separate passwords?" I blinked. "What?" "Separate passwords." I thought about it. Maybe 18 months earlier. Frank nodded. "When did he begin managing financial documents alone?" I thought again. About the same time. The questions kept coming. Each answer revealed another piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized existed. By the end of lunch, I felt sick. Not because Frank had uncovered anything new. Because he had organized the truth. Sometimes that's worse. Around this time, several mutual friends started choosing sides. That was another unpleasant surprise. People I had known for 20 years suddenly became experts on my marriage. Some supported me. Others didn't. One woman actually told me I should forgive Greg. People make mistakes. A mistake. Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. Buying the wrong milk is a mistake. Selling trust property through forged documents isn't exactly a mistake. I stopped returning some phone calls after that. Life became simpler. Lonelier too, but simpler. Then came another unexpected twist. Vanessa started posting less. Much less. The daily luxury photos slowed down, then stopped entirely. Linda, who possessed investigative skills that rivaled the FBI, quickly figured out why. Apparently, Vanessa had discovered Greg's financial problems. Nobody knew exactly how, but word spread fast. One afternoon, Linda called again. "You'll love this." "What happened now?" Vanessa moved out. I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" 3 suitcases. Neighbor saw the whole thing. I sat there stunned. After all the destruction, after all the drama, the great romance seemed to be developing cracks. Fast. The funniest part, Greg had left his marriage for a woman attracted to money. Then the money disappeared. Some life lessons teach themselves. But the biggest development arrived 2 weeks later. Robert called early on a Tuesday morning. His voice sounded serious. Not worried. Serious. "Diane, we have a hearing date." I set down my coffee. "A hearing. The judge wants testimony." My pulse quickened. "When?" "6 weeks." For a moment neither of us spoke. 6 weeks, after months of paperwork and investigations, everything was finally moving toward a public courtroom. A place where evidence mattered. A place where stories ended. Or began. Robert broke the silence. "The buyer's attorneys are aggressive." I figured. "They plan to question Greg extensively." I nodded. "Good." For months, Greg had been hiding behind emails, lawyers, and paperwork. Now he would have to answer questions himself. Under oath. In public. I wasn't excited. At least that's what I told myself. The truth was more complicated. Part of me still loved the man I'd married. Or maybe I loved who I thought he was. Another part wanted accountability. Not revenge. Not destruction. Just truth. The problem was that truth has a way of causing collateral damage. A week before the hearing, investigators completed another review of the documents. The results were devastating. Multiple forged signatures. Questionable transfers. False representations. The evidence kept growing. And for the first time, I began hearing something new from the attorneys. Not property dispute. Not contract disagreement. Not even civil liability. A different phrase appeared. Potential criminal exposure. That phrase changed the atmosphere completely. The trapdoor beneath Greg's feet was opening. Slowly, but opening. And 6 weeks later, in a crowded Los Angeles courtroom, everyone would finally see it happen. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning in downtown Los Angeles. I arrived early. Very early. Years of working in schools had trained me to show up before everyone else. Old habits stick. The courthouse was already busy when Robert and I walked through security shortly after 8. Lawyers carrying briefcases, families sitting quietly on benches, people checking phones. The usual mix of anxiety and boredom that seems to exist in every courthouse in America. I wore a navy blue blazer and a simple pearl necklace. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress anyone. I just wanted to look like myself. Because for months I had felt like I was living someone else's life. Today I wanted my own life back. Robert and I found seats near the front. The courtroom slowly filled. At around 8:45, Greg walked in. For the first time since our separation, I barely recognized him. He looked older. Not dramatically older. Just worn down. The confidence he'd carried on our porch months earlier wasn't there anymore. His suit looked expensive. His face looked exhausted. Then Vanessa entered behind him. That surprised me. From what I'd heard, their relationship had been struggling. Apparently not enough to keep her away from court. She sat beside Greg without speaking. No hand-holding. No smiles. No affectionate glances. Just silence. That told me everything. The judge entered at 9 sharp. Everyone stood. The hearing began. Unlike television courtrooms, real hearings move slowly. There are procedures. Introductions. Arguments about documents. Questions about technical details. For the first hour, I mostly listened. The attorneys for the investment company laid out the timeline. Property negotiations. Purchase agreements. Electronic signatures. Fund transfers. The story unfolded piece by piece. Each fact seemed worse than the one before. Greg sat quietly, occasionally whispering to his attorney, occasionally rubbing his forehead. The buyer's attorney, a sharp woman named Karen Mitchell, was relentless. Professional. Prepared. Completely unimpressed by excuses. Around 10:30, she began presenting financial records. That's when things became uncomfortable. For Greg, large transfers appeared on screens throughout the courtroom. Luxury purchases, travel expenses, jewelry, vehicle payments, designer clothing. The proceeds from the invalid sale had disappeared quickly, much faster than anyone expected. Karen pointed toward one transaction, a $14,000 watch purchased 3 days after receiving funds. Another, first-class airfare to Hawaii. Another, luxury resort accommodations. One by one the purchases appeared. I glanced toward Vanessa. She had gone completely still. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen. The expression on her face was changing, slowly, painfully, like someone realizing they bought a ticket for the wrong train. Then came the trust documents. That was where everything truly fell apart. Margaret Ellis, the retired judge and co-trustee, testified first. She was 72 years old, sharp as a razor. She answered every question calmly, clearly, without hesitation. No trustee meeting occurred. No authorization was granted. No sale approval existed. No consent was given. Simple answers. Devastating answers. The trust paperwork left little room for interpretation. The property simply could not have been sold legally. Period. Then Robert testified. For over an hour he explained the structure of the trust, its protections, its requirements, its history. The courtroom became very quiet, because everyone could see where this was heading. The property had never been Greg's, not even indirectly, not even partially. He had built an entire transaction on authority he didn't possess. Then came the forged signatures. I had been dreading this part, not because I feared the truth, because hearing it aloud would make everything real. A forensic document examiner testified next. She displayed examples of my authentic signatures alongside the electronic signatures used in the sale documents. The differences were obvious, even to me. The expert explained her findings methodically, professionally. There was no drama in her voice, no emotion, just facts. By the time she finished, the courtroom atmosphere had completely shifted. This was no longer a misunderstanding, no longer a divorce dispute, no longer a paperwork mistake. The evidence spoke for itself. At one point, Karen Mitchell turned toward Greg. Did Mrs. Parker personally authorize you to sign on her behalf? Greg shifted in his chair. No. The words seemed to hang in the room. A few moments later came another question. Did you inform the buyer that the property was owned by a trust? No. Karen nodded. Nothing more. She didn't need more. The answer was enough. Around lunchtime, the judge called a short recess. People immediately began talking, whispering, speculating, moving through the hallway. I stepped outside for air. The California sun felt strangely comforting. Robert joined me. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he smiled. You doing okay? I considered the question. Surprisingly, I was. Not happy. Not triumphant. Just calm. For months, I'd been carrying uncertainty. Today, uncertainty was being replaced by facts. Facts are easier to live with. Even painful ones. When we returned after lunch, the hearing entered its final phase. And that's when the most unexpected moment happened. Karen introduced additional financial records. Records showing Greg's debt. All of it. Credit cards, loans, gambling losses, business obligations. The numbers were staggering. Even I hadn't seen the complete picture. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Then I heard movement. I turned. Vanessa was staring at the documents, completely frozen. The color had drained from her face. She looked at Greg, then back at the records, then back at Greg again. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, because in that moment she finally understood. There was no fortune, no secret wealth, no glamorous future waiting, only debt. Mountains of debt. Greg leaned toward her, apparently trying to explain something. She stood, picked up her purse, and walked away. No speech, no shouting, no tears. She simply left. The courtroom doors closed behind her. The timing was almost comical. Months of romance ended in less than 10 seconds. Several people exchanged looks. Even the judge appeared mildly amused. Greg watched the doors for a long moment, then lowered his head. For the first time, he looked completely alone. The remainder of the hearing moved quickly. The judge summarized key findings: the trust ownership, the unauthorized sale, the forged signatures, the financial transfers. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. The judge looked directly at Greg. His voice remained calm, but firm. The evidence presented raises concerns beyond the scope of this civil proceeding. The room became silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Further review? Additional investigation. Potential consequences. Serious ones. Then the judge adjourned. Just like that, months of deception collapsed in a single day. People began gathering their documents. Attorneys packed briefcases. Spectators filed toward the exits. I remained seated, breathing, thinking, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Closure. As the room emptied, Greg finally looked at me. Really looked at me. For a moment I saw the man I had married. The man who once made me laugh. The man I trusted. Then the moment passed. I stood and gathered my things. Before leaving, I spoke quietly. Not for revenge. Not for victory. Simply because it was true. My grandfather didn't leave me that inheritance because he trusted money. Greg said nothing. I continued. He left it because he knew exactly who he could trust. Greg lowered his eyes, and for the first time since all of this began, he had no answer. 6 months later, I was sitting on the back deck of the Malibu property, watching the Pacific Ocean roll toward shore. The sun was beginning to set. Pelicans skimmed low across the water. A light breeze carried the smell of salt and seaweed. For the first time in nearly a year, everything felt quiet. Not perfect. Not magical. Just quiet. And after everything that had happened, quiet felt like a gift. The trust still owned the property. That hadn't changed. The courts had confirmed it. The trust protections remained in place exactly as my grandfather intended. The house wasn't mine to sell. It wasn't mine to gamble with. It wasn't mine to leverage. My responsibility was simply to care for it and preserve it for future generations. Looking back, I understood why Grandpa Walter had structured things that way. At the time, I thought he was being cautious. Now I realized he had been wise. Far wiser than I appreciated. The legal fallout from Greg's actions continued for months after the hearing. I wasn't involved in most of it. Thankfully, by then I had spent enough time in conference rooms and attorney offices to last a lifetime. But news still reached me, especially in a town where people loved to talk. The investment company pursued its losses aggressively. Several civil claims moved forward. Additional investigations followed. Legal expenses piled up. The money Greg thought would solve his problems disappeared faster than he could have imagined. I learned something important during that period. Consequences rarely arrive all at once. They arrive in installments. One decision, then another. One bill, one lawsuit, one uncomfortable conversation, one door quietly closing. And eventually people find themselves standing inside a life they built themselves. Greg experienced that firsthand. The luxury apartment he had rented didn't last. The expensive car disappeared. Several accounts were frozen during ongoing disputes. Friends who once crowded around him became harder to find. Funny how that works. When things are going well, people want invitations. When things fall apart, suddenly everyone gets busy. As for Vanessa, I heard very little after the courthouse hearing. Apparently she moved to Arizona. At least that's what Linda told me. I never verified it. Honestly, I wasn't interested. For months I had imagined confronting her, asking questions, demanding explanations, but eventually I realized something. She wasn't the person who had made promises to me. Greg was. Holding on to anger toward her felt like carrying luggage after the trip had ended. Eventually you just want to put it down. My own recovery wasn't nearly as smooth as people assumed. That's something many revenge stories leave out. The victory comes. The bad people lose. The credits roll. Real life doesn't work that way. Even after the courtroom hearing, I still had mornings where I woke up confused. For a split second, I'd forget everything. Then I'd remember the divorce, the affair, the lies, the house, the investigations, all of it. Grief doesn't follow legal timelines. It shows up whenever it wants. Sometimes while buying groceries, sometimes while folding laundry, sometimes while hearing a song you haven't heard in 20 years. One afternoon, I found an old photograph while cleaning a closet. Greg and I were standing beside the Grand Canyon. We looked happy, genuinely happy. I sat on the floor holding that picture for nearly an hour. Not because I wanted him back, because I was mourning something. Not the marriage itself. The future I thought we were building. Those aren't always the same thing. Eventually, life started filling with new things, small things first. I reconnected with several old friends I had unintentionally drifted away from during my marriage. I joined a local book club in Malibu. I started walking every morning along the beach. I volunteered twice a week at an adult literacy program in Ventura County. That became one of the best decisions I made. Helping someone learn to read at 65 changes your perspective. People would come into class embarrassed, nervous, ashamed. Then gradually their confidence would grow. Watching that happen reminded me that reinvention isn't reserved for young people. Sometimes the second chapter is stronger than the first. Around that time, Robert invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. No legal documents. No trust meetings. No attorneys. Just lunch. Halfway through the meal, he asked a question. One simple question. Was it worth it? I knew exactly what he meant. The fight. The investigation. The court hearings. Everything. I thought about it carefully. Then I answered honestly, no. He looked surprised. I smiled. The revenge wasn't worth it. He raised an eyebrow. But the truth was, that was the difference. If my goal had been revenge alone, I would have stayed angry forever. Anger always demands more. More punishment. More suffering. More satisfaction. And somehow it's never enough. Truth is different. Truth doesn't need embellishment. It simply stands there, whether people like it or not. The truth was that Greg betrayed our marriage. The truth was that he sold something he didn't own. The truth was that my grandfather anticipated problems long before I did. And the truth was that I survived all of it. Not because I was stronger than everyone else. Not because I had money. Because eventually I accepted reality instead of fighting it. That turned out to be the hardest part. And the most valuable. Today, when I sit on this deck and watch the waves roll in, I don't think about winning. I think about peace. I think about Grandpa Walter. I think about second chances, and I think about how easy it is to underestimate people after a certain age. That's a mistake many people make. Older adults aren't finished. We're not waiting around for life to happen. We're still learning, still adapting, still building new chapters. If there's one lesson I carried away from all this, it's that betrayal reveals character. Not just the character of the person who hurts you. Your own character, too. It forces you to decide who you're going to become next. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. If you've ever faced betrayal, loss, or a major life change later in life, I hope you know you're not alone. Feel free to share your own experience in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, justice, and starting over, I'd love for you to join me again.